What's good, YouTube? It's your boy Show back with another video, man. I saw this JoJo game when they first announced it, and I thought it was like a retread of the old one. But from what I can see, it's basically a side scroller fighting game, and I'm actually interested in that. If I'm being honest, I'm very interested in that. I feel like it could be interesting. But hold on, let me back up. Now, before I want to talk about like the game and why I kind of like it, I want to talk about my love for JoJo's. Now, my favorite anime of all time is Gintama. And that was just running feud between me and a lot of people in the particular school that I went to. They would basically tell me how great JoJo was, and I could never get nobody to watch Gintama, so I was salty. And I used to be like, JoJo's wasn't really anime for me. Like, it was weird. I didn't like the art style and none of that. It was crazy, like real bizarre. Like, well, then eventually, man, I got bored. I got bored enough to just, I think I was going through work, and it was just like I was working a lot. And I turned on Phantom Blood, which is the first part. I turned on Phantom Blood, and to be honest, I wasn't really feeling it. Like, the art style was cool. I did not mind that. And honestly, like, the actual show itself was interesting. I just felt like a little slow to me. Like, it felt like I didn't really care about the characters. They were just kind of like these Saturday morning cartoon-like characters. I mean, Dio was a great evil villain, because, all the things he did was insane. So eventually, man, when it got towards the end of Phantom Blood, I was like, okay, I was kind of invested. I was like, it's okay. It's not really the best. It's kind of overrated. Everybody's talking how good it is. And from here on in the video, I'll just go over like a short summary of how I felt during each arc. Because yes, I know that the topic is about the video game, but JoJo's as a whole takes a lot of importance in terms of like describing this video game. In part 2, which was a battle tendency, I'm grabbing these out the head though, because I didn't do no research on the parts, because I just recently watched JoJo again not so long ago. But Battle Tendency was definitely my favorite. Like, it's not my favorite now. My favorite now is currently Diamond is Unbreakable. So that's gonna be part 4, and I'll get to why that's my favorite in a little bit. But going back to part 2, man, I loved the different uses of Hamon, and I love the different types of enemies that you get to fight. And you get to fight the people who created the Stone Mask, which was a really big problem in part 1. And playing the actual JoJo game, which I've played before and made videos on, the original one, there was actually a couple. There was like one for like the older systems. There was one for like, I believe there was a side scrolling one before. Then they had like the 3D fighter, which you'll probably be seeing background footage of. But like I said, part 2 was great. Part 2 was very interesting, very funny, and just overall it started making me like the show a little bit more. Maybe it's the fact that I got into the Bizarre, because the thing about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is it definitely lives up to its name. It's definitely bizarre anime. There are a lot of crazy scenes and weird moments that you would just not see coming. And if I'm being honest, that's okay, because that makes the anime unique. Now, going on to part 3. Now, when I first watched it the first time, I felt like part 3 was too long, only because the main enemy that you had to fight in part 3 was a returning enemy for one of the other parts, part 1, and it just felt like it took so long to get to him. He was such a highly anticipated fight. Like, I was ready to see that fight, and yes, it was a great fight, one of the best fights in anime history, but it took a long time to get there. Some episodes were kind of just silly and felt a little slower, and it was about 40 episodes, which is like double the amount of both the parts. Like, part 1 and part 2 are basically, I think, 24 episodes altogether. Part 3 was 40 something episodes all by itself, and it basically was based around the I think it's the Journey Around the World in 90 Days story. Only thing that saved it is I really like the characters from 3. Like, while some of the interesting like stands and stuff they fought, which is something they invented new for like the part 3 on forward, like stands became the main thing. They kind of got rid of Hamon, which I'm actually glad for, because once you got to see like all the uses for it in part 2, it was honestly really pointless to keep using it as like the main power source, like the main fighting ability. And with stands, you have a lot more flexibility, you have a lot more creativity that you can do with stands. And it seems like every stand, every season, every series, the stands just start getting more complex and complex, and they start getting better and better. Then moving on to part 4. Part 4 became my favorite part, because at the beginning it is kind of slow. It is kind of like a school life, slice of life with the Josuke and his friends and associates. It's kind of like a slice of life with that. And to be honest, that's cool. I like the switch up. I like the vibe. It went from like traveling all around the world to being in a very, very small town and having like a lot of stand users packed in that small town. And it was actually really interesting. But for me, it was really the second half of the show. Like the second half of the show really cemented it as my favorite so far. Just simply because I love Kira as a villain. Kira is an amazing villain. It's something about like a peaceful serial killer. Like he's the guy that just does everything he needs to do every day on time. And it's like he's just a ruthless serial killer, but he's basically like a regular businessman. And it's like it goes in such a dark territory with part 4. A lot of people say that part 4 just felt like the most oddball one because it was different. It was so different from the rest of JoJo's. In my opinion, it's probably why I liked it the most. I really like Josuke. I really like Jotaro, who's one of my favorite characters from part 2. You know, coming back and doing his thing. I really loved all the gang, and you know, Rohan and everybody from the whole Jotaro and Josuke gang. You know, I really like those characters. So that's got to be why part 4 is my favorite. Now, part 5 was actually very, very good, and maybe during my second rewatch, when I rewatch it, I'll like it a little bit more. I did like part 5. There was some parts I feel like was kind of slow. I didn't like the gang as much as I did in part 2 and part 3. Like part 2, you know, you get to see like Polnareff, which actually he does make an appearance in part 5. But yeah, Polnareff, you got Joseph from part 2, he's still in there. And you got Jotaro, which is like the too cool for school kind of guy. He's an amazing character. He just oozes coolness. Then in part 4, you have, you know, Josuke, the hot-headed Koichi, you know, like the kind of best friend sidekick. And you have you have Jotaro back. You have Rohan, the artistic type. And you know, there's other people in the gang. But just like for part 5 for me, I'm not gonna say I didn't like the gang. Maybe I did like the JoJo as much, because I did like Giorno. But to me, he felt like he was a little bit of a boring character compared to the other ones. I mean, Joseph, to me, is probably like the best JoJo overall. That's because he's like the funniest JoJo. Jotaro is just like the cool JoJo. The first JoJo was Jonathan. He's just like the brave JoJo, I guess. He was kind of a boring character, kind of how I felt about Giorno. Like I said, Giorno was a cool character. And it was something different from other Joe. I feel like every Joe star is supposed to be like different. So, you know, it kind of changes it up a little bit. But I love Bruno, man. I loved like Mr. I'm not even going to try to say his name, but the guy with the Moody Blues stand. And then part 6, I believe it's called part 6, part 7. Jolene, you know, that was a really cool character. Now, I would like to hop back for a second. I did actually like Giorno a lot better towards the end of the series, but I'm not going to crazy spoiler territory with that and why I liked him better. But I did like Jolene as a character, because she just seemed to everything that Jotaro was, but it was the first female JoJo character. So I'm a big fan of Jolene, to be honest. I'm a big fan of that whole season. I'm ready for Netflix to kind of come back and finish animating it before I get my final judgment on it. Now that's the thing, right? I just went through this whole little description of all these parts of JoJo. And it's not to say that JoJo in itself is like crazy complex, because, you know, just sitting and watching it, you don't need to lose brain cells to try to understand what's going on. It's a fire anime. And this is why I know it's gonna be a fire game. The reason why I didn't talk about the game in like detail is because, to be honest, it's a fighting game. The fighting games, anime fighting games in general, are populated by the story of the actual show. You know, the story and the combat of the characters in the story. With JoJo's, we know it's gonna be a fire game. Every game they really had was fire to me. Some of them just didn't hit like the other ones, but they were still fire games. They were still underrated. And with so many different characters, it's hard not to imagine a fighting game that could be interesting, at least to play with friends full time. Between all these different types of stands, JoJo games even have stands and parts that aren't even released yet in the anime. They are literally so jam-packed with different types of fighters. I mean, you got like Dio, you got like all these different stands, you got Hamon users, you got people that don't use either. Like, you got Speedwagon in there. Like I'm all the way down for this new JoJo game, and I just had to show my love for JoJo and just give my quick summary about all the parts and what makes them special for me. With that being said, guys, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video.